All right, let's go to Chad 2024. And we can go back down to Michelangelo. And we might get into Titian as well. Come on. Okay, so here's our artwork. As we walked up to it, you can see the bulletproof glass and you can see the context and the hundreds of people that are crowding around in front of it. Some of these artworks, you're just not going to have a quiet moment in front of. I like to go to the art museum on days when it's a low uh, population of people and be able to have quiet moments in front of artworks. And this artwork is not going to be like that. Anyways, it's not just the artwork itself, but it's also the experience of or the context or what it's around. So if we zoom in just a little bit and we can see the dead Christ on the lap of Mary. And the word pietà literally translates as the pity. And there's two figures here. Which one do you think we should pity? Which one? No, we shouldn't pity the dead one. The mother, because she's lost her son. She's the one that's suffering here, right? He has already suffered. He is not feeling any pain now. But thanks for playing. All right. Anyways, so that's what pietà means. It means the pity. And as we get close, we can see the absolute mastery of Michelangelo's skill to create this artwork, how he makes it so smooth. To carve artwork, you use a hammer and chisel. And there's some chisels, and I showed this to you guys, I think last semester. I showed you a video of carving marble. And there's some that break off lots of stone with a couple of hits, but then as you get finer and finer tools, and then you will use a file. It's called a rasp, and then your final, well, not the final, but then after that, you would use sandpaper to make it very smooth. And then on top of that, you'd wax it. And so you can see this sheen on there. That's the wax on top of the sculpture. I'm going to back up just a second. And they have measured Christ to be about 6 feet tall. And if he is 6 feet tall, then how tall is she? And they've done some calculations with her. If she were to stand up, she would be 7.5 feet tall. So the proportions are a bit off on this. But if I hadn't told you that, it looks normal. It looks, presentable, and it doesn't look weird at all with their proportions. But it is. One thing I think is amazing about this sculpture is how delicate the fabric looks, and you can even see this fabric that goes across her forehead. It was popular at that time. And you remember the painting of the lady with the ermine? She has this sheer fabric that goes across her forehead. That's the same thing that Mary is wearing right here. So it was a popular trend at the time to wear that sheer fabric. And he's able to show that sheer fabric in the sculpture. If you look at her face, I think the time that Jesus died, he was estimated to be about 33 years old. So if he's 33, how old is she? let's say at this time, because women got married early, at 13, 15, 16. So let's say for easy math, let's do 15. All right, so 15 plus 33 is what, 48? Is my math right on that? Does she look 48 to you? All right, so he has carved her to have this ageless beauty, the eternally young. And that is a sign of her virginity, her purity. And if we compare this to the Rodkin Pietà, how are they similar? It's the same part of the story, right? He's come off the cross and he's laid on her lap and she's weeping over his dead body. How are they different? Say that louder. Of course, yeah, right. Once made by Michelangelo. Uh, how are they different visually? Yeah, this all right. The style. So, what is the style show in the one on the right? Yeah, yeah, they're right. It was the Gothic era, and it was German. And when we went over this sculpture, what did I say the Germans were good at? They were good at showing suffering, right? And like this one on the right is all about the suffering. You got the thorns in the head and the blood, and there's blood gushing out of his side. There's blood gushing out of his hands, and you can see the blood gush, like running down his arms. And so and then the one on the left, Michelangelo, is much more sentimental. It's much more like visually beautiful, whereas the one on the right is harsh. All right, we're going to go back to Florence, and we're going to take a look at David. So here's another 3D view. So I'm going to move. I think it's a 3D. All right, so there we go. There we go. So if we look up, we can look up at the statue of David. The statue of David is about 15 feet tall, and it is in the space. So it has natural light coming in. And if we turn around with David to our back, we can look down this hallway, and there's all these figures, these unfinished sculptures carved by Michelangelo. But anyways, this is the space that David is in. All right. Moving on. So here we have the statue of David. He was 24 years old when he carved Pietà, and they loved it so much they commissioned him to sculpt David. He was 26 years old when he was commissioned to sculpt the colossal Davis for the roof of the cathedral. How tall is the cathedral? Yeah, quite is a good answer. Yes, it is quite tall. And if you put a sculpture on the top of the cathedral, would it be easy to see or difficult to see? Right. So, yeah, here's an example of they made a copy of it, put it on the top where it was going to go. And if you look at it from down below, does that look impressive to you? Yeah. All right. Right. Like the massiveness of the cathedral would dwarf the statue of David. So instead, they put it in front of the Palazzo Vecchio, and they have a copy of it right there right now, so you can go and see where it was. And again, the Palazzo Vecchio is the like the city hall for Venice in the during the medieval era and in the Renaissance as well. So I've got another little. Let's go here, and we'll skip to 2 minutes. All right. So now we are standing in the plaza in front of the Palazzo Vecchio. We can look up And then there is the statue of David. And right next to it is this, I forget the name. I'll come back to it. But there is some more sculptures that we'll look at soon. But if we take a look around, this is the Palazzo Vecchio. So it's as if we are standing right there. How about that for a field trip, huh? All right, we're going to move on. So in 2004, they put a replica of the marble that he carved from. So they gave him a piece of marble, and this is the piece that they gave him. So another artist or two other artists had already started working on it, gave up, and so they had this large piece of marble. So they gave it to Michelangelo, and he carved David from this sculpture or from this block of stone. And this block of stone had been sitting around for 50 years. So it is how do I say, not a fantasy, but it's a saying that Michelangelo could look at a stone and look inside of the stone and see the figure inside of it, and then just carve away all the things that are not the figure. That's how he worked. And so he looked inside of the stone, saw the statue of David, and then just carved everything else. He did not work like most artists, excuse me, worked. This, all right, so right here on the in this photograph, this is not Michelangelo, but it shows you how sculptors work in stone. On the left is a little clay figure. So artists will quickly make it's almost like a sketch of a figure out of clay. They don't spend a lot of time on it. It's not a finished artwork, but it's called a maquette. So it's a three-dimensional idea of what the artwork should look like. Then on their block of stone, you can see on this block of stone, he's drawn what it should look like from the front and what it should look like from the side. And so that is an aid so that the artist can sort of kind of look into the stone and see the sculpture there. Well, Michelangelo didn't need to draw this. He didn't need to make the maquette. He already saw it. So he was able to skip these steps and just begin to carve. And that is a very advanced way of making a sculpture. All right, now I did not show you the Verrocchio sculpture, but it is very similar to the Donatello sculpture, which I did show you. And then here we have Michelangelo's. All of these are sculptures of David. Now, let's compare them. How are Verrocchio and Donatello different than the Michelangelo sculpture? Exactly, and that's the point that I was trying to get to, is that the Michelangelo's sculpture, as you said, is not as feminine looking. He is much more masculine. You would say that he's even older. He looks to be about, he could be anywhere from 16 to 20, all right, as a young man. Whereas the others look very young and frail and thin. And that was kind of the point of the story, is that this little tiny David could defeat this giant Goliath. And that's kind of like that is very typical of Michelangelo. So one of the things, Michelangelo is one of my favorites of the Renaissance. And one of the reasons why I like Michelangelo so much is that his artworks are so virile, they're so manly, they're so strong. They have this very strong character, which I will show you soon also becomes a detriment, right? So I'll get to that momentarily. Here's the front and the back of Michelangelo's David. And this is the first time in art that David was shown before the fight. So that's another difference between these three. This is after the fight. David holds the sword and he's standing over Goliath's head. With Donatello, David is holding the sword and standing over Goliath's head. With Michelangelo, he is holding the strap of the sling. So the sling he's holding with his left hand, and then it goes down his back, and then he's holding the rock in the sling with his right hand. I also kind of want to point out the veins that are in David's hand. Like that's the level of detail. Of course, when uh, expand or grow somebody to be 15 feet tall, you are going to be able to see the details much more clear. So if you didn't have these, it would become obvious that it was anatomically like incorrect. Anyways, we have a look at the determined face on David, and can you tell which direction he's looking? Is he looking left or right? He's looking towards his left. He's looking at Goliath, and there's a saying that God protects your right. So then all you have to worry about is what's on your left, and he's looking at his left towards his left to his enemy. Um, David did not fight with brute force, but with skill and reason. And David's expression shows that he is contemplating the challenge that is ahead of him. And then somebody has used the computer and determine what David would look like if you could see his skin and all. It looks a bit odd, doesn't it? Like a little bit out of proportion. The eyes may be a little bit big and the mouth is a little bit small. Anyways, this David is the perfect example of contrapposto. In fact, if you do a Google image search of contrapposto, this will be one of the first images that pops up. So it's the classic contrapposto pose that was started from the Greeks. Once again, we have this, this red and blue lines on this image, and it shows that his right leg is engaged. So that means his left arm is engaged. His left leg is relaxed, and that means his right arm is relaxed. So we have this almost like this X composition going on where the left and the right are coordinated with each other. Then also, as you stand to one side, so for those of you that did not hear me talk about contrapposto the first semester, if you stand on, or if you lean on one foot, then that makes, let's say he's leaning on his right foot, that means his right hip goes up and his left hip goes down. Then his left leg becomes relaxed and it bends, while the right leg becomes straight. Then if your right hip goes up and your left hip goes down, in order to not fall over, your body compensates. So then your right shoulder goes down while your left shoulder goes up. And that creates this contrapposto pose. You know what? I'm going to stop for a second and move this slide. It belongs way up here with the Palazzo Vecchio. That's just a slide showing how they moved it. So they would have built this this crate or this scaffolding around the figure, and then move it with lots of people pulling on ropes and lots of logs beneath. All right, let's get back to this. At one point, they had put gold leaf on the strap and the tree that is attached to his leg, and we all know why that tree is there, right? That's to help support the weight. We have such a massive weight. There's so many tons, and if you put all that weight on these skinny little ankles, then there's no way that those skinny little ankles can support all of that weight. So in sculpture, and it's especially these classic sculptures, we have these people that are attached to tree stumps, and that's just a way for them to support the weight that is above. It was moved inside in the 1800s. In 1873, it was moved outdoors. In 1910, a copy was placed out in the original location of the Palazzo Vecchio, but they made a little change on that. What change did they make? Yeah, they put a leaf on them. All right, censorship. and that shows you the obscenity laws at that time. And since then, another copy has been placed with the original look on it. Again, this gives you a sense of the size and the scale of Michelangelo. All right, and just for fun, all right, so that was funny, right? Okay. So I have a bit of a story, or this is history to tell you. So Pope Julius II wants Michelangelo to sculpt his tomb. And it is an amazing tomb. I just don't have time to cover it, though. But Michelangelo is super excited to sculpt this tomb. He makes all these plans, and he buys out of his own pocket the best marble that you can get to get ready to make this tomb. And then the Pope changes his mind. He says, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm going to fund other projects. I can't pay you right now. And Michelangelo throws an absolute hissy fit. And he basically made himself broke by buying this marble for Pope Julius. So he is fed up with the Pope. He leaves Rome and goes to Florence, where people will treat him better. All right. And Pope Julius sends him letters saying, come back here now. And Michelangelo's all like, no. So the Pope sends an army to go and bring back Michelangelo. So he brings him back by force. He says, you're going to make art for me, whether you like it or not. So they come up, and then Pope Julius tells Michelangelo he wants him to paint. But Michelangelo's like, I'm not a painter, I'm a sculptor. So the Pope compromises and says, you can work on my tomb if you paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. And so Michelangelo agrees to that. So we are going to go and look at the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So again, we're going back to the Vatican City. We're going to zoom in on the cathedral, and there's a little building right next to the cathedral called the Sistine Chapel. And here is a look of it from the outside, and then this is the line that you will stand in for hours to go into it. And then here's the line going into the Sistine Chapel. And then when you go into the Sistine Chapel, this is what there we go. This is what it looks like. So we'll do a little 360 view of the chapel. So you're standing in the middle of the chapel on one's, all right, if we look back, that is the door that you just walked through. And then you are looking at, the Last Judgment, which we'll get to later. But what we're going to talk about right now is the ceiling. So if you look up at the ceiling, and then you can look. All right, that is a massive ceiling to paint. Now, the paintings that are on the sides are done by other artists, and they were up there before Michelangelo painted the ceiling. All right, so that is a view of the room of where the Sistine Chapel ceiling is. The chapel is still in use today. They still hold services in the chapel. And it's also where the Pope is confirmed. So if a Pope dies or if a Pope resigns or retires, then they choose a new Pope. And in that video that I showed you about the Vatican, it's kind of like a Game of Thrones as to who the next Pope will be. So a lot of people are in competition, and it's decided by the church who the new Pope will be. And so as they're choosing a new Pope, all eyes are on the ceiling or the roof of the Sistine Chapel. And if black smoke is coming out of this pipe, that means they have not yet chosen the Pope. But when white smoke comes out, that means they have chosen the Pope. And everybody is, there's a big cheer outside, and everybody is anxious to know who the next Pope is. All right, back to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Before he painted it, it had already been painted a blue with stars on it. And once again, these paintings that are around on the side, those were done by previous artists. All right, so this is kind of tells the story of Michelangelo's painting of the Sistine Chapel. So this cartoon image is of Michelangelo showing his plan to the Pope. And here are Michelangelo's assistants, his apprentices, preparing the fresco. So you can see the guy on the far right is making the fresco. The guy in the middle is putting the fresco up on the wall. And then the guy on the left is putting the cartoons up on the wall. So I showed you that process, and he has these large pieces of paper, and he puts the paper up on the wall, and he presses into the lines into the wet fresco, or he pokes holes in it and all along the lines, and then he dabs that powder, and it when he pulls the paper away, the lines can be seen, and that's how he paints. All right, there was lots of problems with painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So I'll go through these problems and these challenges. One challenge is that it is a huge ceiling. It is a lot of space to cover. Usually a fresco is of a wall, and you have the wall is maybe 40 feet wide, maybe 30 feet high. But imagine that like 10 times down the length of the ceiling. So it is absolutely a massive ceiling. It is a complicated perspective. So it is a curved wall or curved ceiling. It's like a barrel vault up there. And that curve, if you're standing down on the ground and you look up, and if you draw it on a piece of paper and then trace it onto a curved ceiling, it looks weird from down below. So you have to draw it weird so that when you put it up on the ceiling, it looks normal from down below. So he has to change the proportions and the perspective on his drawings before he puts them up. He hires a group to prepare the plaster for the fresco, and this team was not a very good team. They were mixing it wrong, and it created mildew. Mildew started growing on the plaster, and that's bad for fresco. So he fired that staff, and he hired a new staff. And the part that he had painted, they had to take it all down and start over. So he got about like 1/10 of the way through and realized that they had done it all wrong. So they had to destroy it and start over. Also, does heat rise or does it go down? It rises. So he's working at the top of near the ceiling, and Italy is a hot place. All right, it gets very hot in Italy. There's no air conditioning. There's no electric fans. So it is just hot. And he's up in the hottest part of the room, which is way up at the top. So sweat is in his face constantly, and he's very uncomfortable. Another problem is that the chapel stayed open. So he's up there painting, and that fresco, you put on fresco, you have to paint on it while it's wet. You can't wait till it dries. So you have to work quickly while it's wet. And if the chapel is open, the priests would come in and they'd have their service. Well, when they came in, he has to leave because he can't be working while they have their ceremonies. So if it's wet and then he leaves, by the time he gets back, it might be dry and he has to do it over again. So that was another problem that he was having with the chapel ceiling. And then also, he's not a painter. You know, he doesn't want to paint. He doesn't like painting. He doesn't want to do this assignment, but he has to. Here is an illustration of what an artist thinks that the scaffolding would have looked like. On the far side of the ceiling, you can see that it's still painted blue, that he hasn't painted it yet. And then up here, you can see that you would have to climb up these stairs or these steps all the way to the top. And then they built this scaffolding up like that. I want you to know this term, terribility. Michelangelo had anger management issues. He was a very angry person. He had a very strong personality. The Pope was also had a strong personality and had anger management issues. And what happens when you put two angry people and working on the same project together? You get a lot of fighting amongst them. So they were constantly fighting. This idea of terribility is that because Michelangelo has such a strong personality, you can see that strength in his artwork. So we could already see it in the statue of David. David was not a wimpy little child. All right. So the strength of Michelangelo oozed out of the statue of David. And it's going to happen again here on the ceiling. And the Pope continually asked Michelangelo, when are you going to be finished? And Michelangelo would always return with, when I can. The Pope once hit him with a stick. Like their fight got so bad, it became abusive. And the Pope would also disguise himself to climb the ladders to see the painting. But Michelangelo saw through the disguise and threw pieces of wood at the Pope as he was climbing the ladders. All right, sometimes Michelangelo refused to work from them fighting, and sometimes the Pope refused to pay Michelangelo. So it was a tumultuous relationship that the two of these men had. And that was another problem and difficulty of painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. How are we doing on time? We have 8 minutes left. All right. I think we will start with the painting tomorrow, right? I don't want to rush through this. All right. Are there any questions about anything? And I think some people had some stuff that they wanted to turn in that I'll look at. Okay, so let's go back to the internets. Let's hit this.